Hey folks, April Verch here with another fiddle tutorial. Thank you for joining me. If it's your first time and you don't mind clicking the red subscribe button for my channel, that really helps me out. If it's not your first time, sorry to sound like a broken record, but without getting into all of the boring details, those numbers and clicks really make a difference to me. So thank you for doing that if you haven't already. So today we're going to be talking about jigs. I promised myself I wouldn't say that we're going to get jiggy with it, but there, I just did it. Jigs are sometimes difficult to get into the right groove. I have a lot of students ask me about this, and the first thing we're going to talk about is just the time signature of a jig. We'll start with the basics. So jigs are in 6/8 time. That means that we would count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if we were tapping our foot, you'd notice that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The accent falls on the 1, the first beat, and the 4th. I'd say that if we're going to be picky about it or get right into the details, that 1 is slightly stronger, that 1 pulse is slightly stronger than the accent that falls on the 4. So let's take this over to the fiddle and use our bow to accomplish that accent for us in a way. We're going to do long 2, 3, long 5, 6, down 2, 3, up 5, 6, and those longer bows will automatically create a bit of an accent. So if I just use an open A and I do, we've got that accent happening on the long bows. We also have a stronger 1 because that's a down, which is stronger sounding, than a long up, which is still accented, but just a little bit less. So let's try playing a scale with our long and accented notes. So we'll just play a D scale. So we'll practice. You can loosen up a little bit and not be so precise and get a little closer to the jig feel. Now we're going to take it to the next step and talk about those eighth notes. So the eighth notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oftentimes when you look at sheet music, if you're using written music for a jig, it's almost impossible to articulate how those eighth notes should be written. So a lot of times it'll just be written as straight eighths. So let's take a common tune like the Irish Washerwoman. It might be written like this. But that doesn't sound like a jig. Okay, so then we try to do the long bow thing that we were just talking about with the scale. Closer, but still not there. Okay, so we don't write dotted eighth notes because that would sound like. Looking for is something that comes in between straight eighth notes and dotted eighth notes. Sometimes we call it a swung eighth note, a swing feel. It's where the notes sort of have a bounce and a groove to them, and it sounds a bit more like, so let me do it with a plain note. So if I did straight eighths, dotted, swung. So it's somewhere in between, and one really efficient way of practicing that is to take a phrase of your jig and try to mix up the eighth notes that are straight, that are a little bit dotted, and a little bit swung. So if I play this phrase, with a mix of dotted of notes that are straight eighths, a couple that are swung, a couple that are dotted, and I'm just mixing them up. Straight, dotted, swung, straight, dotted. Sometimes just by trying to mix them up, you end up creating that swung feel for yourself, which sounds a little bit more jiggy. And so we want to keep using our bow for the accent, tapping your foot. If you're comfortable with that, your body has to feel that accent. So sometimes the connection between a down bow and a tap of the foot helps that accent to come out easier than all of these things you're trying to think about at once. So let's backtrack a little bit. Not every jig is notey, so you don't have eighth notes all the time. Irish Washerwoman was a good example to start with because it is fairly notey. We have lots of eighth notes and a couple of quarters. But what if that tune was written like this? Where there's a lot more space. Then it's not as easy to use that bowing trick we talked about at the beginning, and you have to rely on the accents and on your articulation as well. So in that case, it makes a big difference if I join them all up. Or if I mix them up, short, long, in changing the articulation to whether it's separated or joined up, I'm actually also creating a difference in the rhythm in a really subtle way that helps it swing, that helps it groove. So I always tell people that when I was a little girl watching Saturday morning cartoons, there would be a Lucky Charms commercial with a little leprechaun dancing a jig. And you have to try and picture someone very light on their feet and create that up sound, that lift, that bounce, at the same time staying grounded on the 1 and 4. So practicing squeak. I don't know if you could hear my foot there. So I'm just playing a simple little scale up and down, and I'm trying to vary the accents, the articulation, the straight, dotted, and swung. And by doing that on a scale where you don't have to think so hard about notes, hopefully, then when you take it back into your jig, you can take out just one phrase at a time and do that. Just play it maybe 6 times and see if you can play it differently each time in terms of articulation and rhythm. Over time, that translates into having a better overall groove and jig feel. Again, this is very much something that takes experience and practice, so it might not come right away. And there's no substitute for playing along with someone else. And if you can't do that live, which these days is extra challenging. Play along with recordings, YouTube videos. Find a jig that you like, learn to play it, and then play it along with different people. And sort of just sit back and watch first and see what they do to create that jig feel. Think about these exercises we've talked about and play along, trying to lighten up and find that inner leprechaun from the Lucky Charms commercial. I hope some of these tips are helpful. Some of these ideas are fairly abstract, and there's a lot of different fiddle styles in which we play jigs, and each of them has more specific things. So this is just sort of keeping it general, but trying to dig a little deeper and break it apart to say, what's really happening when I hear that jig groove? These are some of the things that I've just observed personally that I hear people doing. To notice that they're not always straight, they're not always swung, they're not always dotted, but a lot of the best jig grooves from fiddlers I admire seem to mix them up. I've never had that pointed out to me, and maybe my theory is completely wrong, but it sort of worked for me just thinking of it that way. It might not be precise when I add it to a tune, but it sort of helps me get to that groove. So in closing, I'm just going to play a jig for you. This is a traditional tune called To the Ladies that I really like, and I thought it would be fun to play one that you might know or learn and be able to play along with as we were talking about. So, To the Ladies in the key of A. 1, 2, 1, 2. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again for joining me, and see you next time.